On June 4th, 1943, along Railroad Street in Mexia, Texas, a profound ideological crisis was being recorded in miniature. The pencil of Unifitzia Vera Burkhart trembled slightly as he wrote in his concealed diary, observations so subversive they would have guaranteed solitary confinement if discovered by his Wehrmacht officers. "The Americans must be lying to us," he recorded. No nation could possess such abundance while fighting a war on two fronts. He had just witnessed a spectacle that fundamentally contradicted 3 years of meticulous Nazi propaganda, an endless constellation of electric lights blazing from every farmhouse, street corner, and shop window. This was an unrestrained flow of electricity stretching across the Texas plains at 10 o'clock at night. In stark contrast, blackout regulations had plunged the German Reich into darkness since 1940, and even before the war, rural electrification reached barely 20% of German farms. Yet here, in the nation Nazi propaganda had dismissed as decadent and collapsed, power flowed with undeniable prodigality. That evening, 1,850 veterans of Erwin Rommel's vaunted Afrika Korps stepped down from the passenger train, not from cramped cattle cars or freight wagons, but from cushioned Pullman coaches complete with dining services and sleeping berths. The entire population of Mahia had turned out to witness their arrival. What none of them knew was that this moment would initiate the most systematic psychological transformation of the modern conflict. The demolition of Nazi ideology through the sheer, undeniable display of American industrial capacity. The true mathematics of Allied victory were being written not in battle plans, but in production statistics that would soon shatter every assumption these seasoned soldiers cared about their enemies, their homeland, and their cause. The collapse had begun months earlier, on May 13, 1943. In Tunisia, General Jürgen von Arnim, Rommel's replacement, surrendered along with approximately 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian soldiers, the exact figures varying as scattered units continued to yield over several days. The Wehrmacht's most experienced desert fighters, men who had driven the British back to Egypt and earned the grudging respect of Montgomery himself, were suddenly prisoners. Among them was Hetman Friedrich Radke, holder of the Iron Cross First Class, a veteran of the France campaign, and wounded twice in North Africa. His diary, discovered decades later in the National Archives, would provide historians with the most detailed account of the psychological impact of American captivity. The journey from military defeat to ideological revelation commenced in the port of Oran, Algeria, as Radke and 30,000 other prisoners waited in makeshift camps for transport ships. American efficiency immediately began to crack their preconceptions. The U.S. Army processed thousands of prisoners daily with an organizational precision that exceeded anything the Wehrmacht had achieved even at the height of its power. Identity cards photographed and filed, medical examinations completed, inoculations administered, and Geneva Convention rights scrupulously adhered to. The initial processing was handled in fluent German by American officers, specifically trained for this pivotal moment. Yet, the true psychological rupture began not with interrogation, but with the ration lines. Oberreiter Hans Muir, a prisoner from elite 21st Panzer Division, recounted the experience 8 months later in a letter to his mother. Waiting in the holding cage at Oran for transport ships, he noted, "The Americans fed us better than we had eaten in 6 months of desert warfare." The sheer luxury, white bread, genuine coffee, and meat served twice daily, was initially dismissed as crude propaganda, a deliberate attempt to impress the vanquished. The profound realization that this was merely the standard American military ration shattered preconceived notions of the enemy's material scarcity. The very vessels designated to ferry them across the Atlantic, the ubiquitous Liberty ships, stood as undeniable monuments to American industrial supremacy. The staggering fact of their production were themselves weapons. The SS Robert E. Peary, for instance, had been constructed in a mere 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes at the Kaiser Shipyard in Richmond, California. Had German intelligence encountered such a figure, it would have been instantly dismissed as absurd, impossible propaganda. These standardized cargo ships, rolling off the assembly line at a peak rate of 3 per day, were returning from successfully supplying the European theater. Instead of sailing with empty holds, they were repurposed to carry human cargo, transporting up to 30,000 prisoners, a war monthly by the summer of 1943. The 2-week Atlantic crossing in July 1943 initiated the second, sustained phase of psychological demolition. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann of the 90th Light Division meticulously documented this journey in letters recovered after his repatriation. He observed that the ship's crew discarded more food waste daily than his entire company had been allotted in weekly rations during their desperate final months fighting in North Africa. Zimmermann recorded witnessing American sailors openly disposing of half-eaten steaks, untouched loaves of bread, and gallons of milk deemed slightly past prime. This casual, thoughtless waste, he realized, was not intended to mock the prisoners, but flowed from a fundamental reality. To the Americans, supply was functionally limitless, rendering such tremendous waste meaningless. These ships transformed into floating classrooms dedicated to illustrating American power. Prisoners learned that the specific vessel carrying them was merely one of 2,710 Liberty ships constructed throughout the war, each one demanding 250,000 parts assembled from components sourced across 32 different states. Talkative American guards revealed that the massive engines were themselves products of decentralized efficiency, with 3 separate factories producing the 900 horsepower cylinders that were ultimately assembled in new ports established only 2 years prior. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stauburn, a scion of an aristocratic Prussian family with military service dating back to Frederick the Great, captured the moment of realization in his memoirs. As our ship approached the American coast, he wrote, I watched the radar antenna rotating tirelessly above the bridge. This technology, which we believed only we, and perhaps the British, possessed in strictly limited quantities, was standard issue equipment on a mere cargo vessel. It was at this juncture Stauburn confessed that he first harbored the suspicion that Germany had irrevocably lost the war. The arrival on August 2, 1943, at Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia, confirmed this dread, as the initial sight of America utterly shattered the final remnants of Nazi propaganda concerning American industrial weakness. The sheer magnitude of the Norfolk Naval Base offered the prisoners their first undeniable proof of American industrial power. Sprawling across 4,300 acres, its immense docks stretched for miles, serviced by towering cranes capable of loading and unloading dozens of ships simultaneously. In a single day, this port handled a volume of tonnage exceeding what the entire German port of Hamburg could manage in a full week. Gerrit Jon Baer, a factory worker conscripted from the Ruhr Valley, meticulously documented the scene in his secret diary, counting 47 cargo ships in various stages of loading or unloading. He noted that each electric crane moved loads that would have demanded the labor of a dozen men and a team of horses back in Germany. These machines operated smoothly, continuously, and notably without the thick pall of coal smoke that perpetually choked Germany's industrial heartlands. As the columns of prisoners were formed to march to the waiting trains, the contrast between American and German civilian life became startlingly apparent. They passed vast parking lots filled not with military vehicles, but with hundreds of private automobiles belonging to ordinary dock workers. In the Reich, private automobile ownership remained a rare privilege reserved for the wealthy and the party elite. The promised Volkswagen, a central piece of propaganda since 1934, remained an unfulfilled dream, with fewer than 1,000 ever delivered to civilians. Here, common laborers drove their own cars to work. Yet, nothing could prepare them for the mode of transport itself. Instead of the expected boxcars or the cramped 40 and 8-foot wagons, designed to carry 40 men or 8 horses, which had moved German troops across Europe, they were directed toward luxury passenger coaches. These were Pullman cars, complete with thickly padded seats that converted into sleeping berths, dining cars featuring white tablecloths and silver cutlery, and observation cars offering panoramic windows. We boarded like tourists, not prisoners, recorded Hedman Radke. The American guards, seemingly embarrassed by the opulence, inadvertently drove the ideological wedge deeper. One sergeant actually apologized that the air conditioning was not functioning properly in their car, a luxury the prisoners had previously believed existed only on Hitler's personal train. This 3-day train journey, routing them from Norfolk toward the permanent camps in Texas and Oklahoma, proved more destructive to the core tenets of Nazi ideology than any military defeat. As the trains rolled for the night across Virginia, prisoners pressed their faces against the glass, witnessing an America that the propaganda machine insisted could not exist. Every small town, Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro, blazed with illumination. Communities that in Germany would have been fortunate to possess a single electric street lamp displayed dazzling illuminated shop windows, electric signs, and houses where lights burned brightly in multiple rooms. The trains passed factories running full night shifts, their windows glowing, their parking lots still filled even at midnight. Oberg Reiter Mayer, whose father was a devout Nazi party bloc leader in Hamburg, wrote in a letter discovered in 1987, "We passed through dozens of cities that first night. Everyone had more electricity than all of Hamburg. When the guards claimed this was normal, stating that every American town had electricity since the 1920s, Mayer called the guard a liar. The Americans simply shrugged and replied that they would see." In Roanoke, Virginia, the train stopped for water and coal. The initial shock came not from the landscape, but from the railway yards themselves. German prisoners watched with stunned disbelief as American railway crews accomplished in a mere 30 minutes tasks that would have demanded 2 exhaustive hours in the Reich. Automated coal loaders, high-capacity electric water pumps, and meticulously mechanized lubrication systems demonstrated an operational superiority that transcended mere efficiency. It was a fundamental technological chasm. Even more profound than the machinery was the casual, almost reckless, material wealth of the laborers. These men wore quality leather boots, an item that represented 2 months' wages for a German factory worker. They consumed chilled Coca-Cola from pristine glass bottles, discarding the empties into bins without a second thought. Cigarettes were smoked continuously, often extinguished half-finished, a visible symbol of disposable abundance. This spectacle of resource consumption was quantified by those best suited to understand it. Feldwebel Heinrich Müller, an electrical engineer who had worked for Siemens before the war, meticulously calculated that the single railway yard where their transport pawls utilized more electricity in 1 hour than his entire Berlin district consumed in a full day. The waste, he recorded, was magnificent. Lights blazed in vacant buildings, and electric fans churned the air in deserted rooms. It was, Muller concluded, the unmistakable carelessness of infinite resource. As the trains drove deeper into Tennessee and Kentucky, the full scale of American industrial power unfolded before them. Through the windows, the prisoners witnessed endless ribbons of factories, each facility dwarfing anything most of them had ever encountered in Germany. Along the river in Tennessee, the Alcoa aluminum plant stretched for 3 miles, its gargantuan electric furnaces consuming 175,000 kilowatts of power, an output greater than the needs of the entire city of Munich. Near Louisville, the convoys slowed, allowing the prisoners a close view of the Rubbertown complex. Here, immense synthetic rubber plants had materialized from barren fields in barely 18 months. For massive facilities, each employing thousands, were dedicated to producing 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber annually. This figure was staggering. Germany, despite pioneering the process, had never managed to produce more than 120,000 tons, even in its peak year of wartime production. Oberleutnant Erich Hoffmann, a chemist formerly with I.G. Farben, grasped the devastating implications instantly. In a post-war interview, he recalled his realization. "I knew those plants. I could identify the distillation columns, the catalytic crackers. Each facility was inherently more advanced than anything we had constructed, and there were 4 of them in this single location. They told us there were dozens more across the country." The final, crushing realization came as the trains passed Ford's Willow Run plant outside Detroit, a structure visible for miles. This single factory, constructed in just 9 months, maintained production rhythm capable of assembling a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. At its peak, 42,000 workers managed assembly lines supplied by 1,500 subcontractors, handling 1.55 million individual parts. The plant itself sprawled across 2.5 million square feet of floor space and drew more electrical power than the entire German city of Cologne. Hauptmann Werner Wörli, a Luftwaffe pilot shot down over Tunisia, pressed his face tightly against the glass as they moved past. He reported counting 17 B-24s in various stages of completion visible just from the train track. The prisoners have been assured that American aircraft were inferior, hastily constructed, and destined to fail in combat. But Wörli could see the undeniable precision of the assembly lines, the sheer, relentless volume of production, and the lie of the propaganda was exposed. The initial realization of American industrial capacity transcended mere manufacturing speed. It was the sheer scope of resources that proved shattering. As the prison trains penetrated deeper into the American interior, the destruction of Nazi mythology became absolute. Crossing the Mississippi River at St. Louis, the prisoners traversed the Eads Bridge, looking down upon barges carrying more grain than the entirety of Germany's 1942 harvest. Along both banks, monolithic grain elevators stretched into the distance, each structure holding enough wheat to sustain a major German city for months. Anracia Karl Schmidt, a farmer's son from Bavaria, captured this shock in his diary. The Americans transport food as we transport ammunition, in endless quantities without concern for loss. I watched them loading a single barge with enough wheat to feed my entire village for 5 years. The crane operator was eating a sandwich with meat thicker than our weekly ration. The profound chasm between continental rationing and American consumption was brutally evident in Kansas City. The train paused near a massive stockyard where tens of thousands of cattle awaited slaughter, the air thick for miles with a pervasive odor of meat-packing plants. German POWs, many of whom had subsisted on a meager 200 grams of meat per week, even during the luckier periods of the North African campaign, watched American laborers consume thick beef sandwiches during their lunch breaks. They ate meat like we ate bread, wrote prisoner Paul Fisher, correcting himself instantly. No, that's wrong. They ate meat like we wish we could eat bread. This casual abundance was underscored when a guard purchased 20 hamburgers, meat, cheese, and vegetables on white bread for a mere 15 cents each, paying without hesitation, using a single dollar bill. This was not a special provision. This was the standard American diet. The arrival at the designated camps provided the next systemic level of cognitive demolition. Camp Hearn, Texas, constructed in just 4 months, was designed to house between 3,000 and 4,800 prisoners in conditions far exceeding those many had known as civilians. The wooden barracks featured standard amenities, electric lights, flush toilets, hot showers, and steam heat. Crucially, each building utilized more lumber than some entire German villages possessed. The camp hospital proved an even greater shock to the medical personnel among the detainees. Oberst Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Friedrich Bauer, the chief surgeon of the 164th Light Division, found himself in a facility better equipped than most civilian hospitals back in the Reich. Standard provisions for enemy prisoners included X-ray machines, advanced surgical equipment, and pharmaceutical supplies that had been completely unavailable in Germany since 1941. Dr. Bauer would later testify to the most astonishing revelation. They had penicillin, this miracle drug that we had only heard rumors about. They use it freely, even on prisoners with minor infections. German soldiers were dying for want of basic sulfur drugs, and the Americans were giving us their most advanced medicine without hesitation. The camp kitchen rapidly became another involuntary classroom in American prosperity. Prisoners assigned cooking duties encountered walk-in refrigerators, industrial electric mixers, automated dishwashers, and gas ranges capable of preparing meals for 5,000 men. The daily ration routinely included fresh milk, eggs, meat, vegetables, and, tellingly, white bread. The German prisoners immediately encountered quantities of food that their home front had not witnessed since the start of the war in 1939. The psychological shock was profound, crystallized in the observations of men like Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a former hotel chef from Munich. Krebs recorded the staggering waste inherent in American military logistics. Today, we threw away more food than my family has seen in 3 years. Not spoiled food, simply excess. He noted that American regulations mandated the preparation of a 10% surplus to guarantee every prisoner received full rations, resulting in a routine discarding of perfectly edible sustenance. I wept as I threw perfectly good bread into the garbage, he confessed. By September 1943, the critical labor shortage gripping American agriculture compelled the government to authorize the employment of prisoners of war in fields and factories nationwide. This pragmatic decision, driven purely by domestic necessity, achieved a level of ideological subversion far exceeding the capabilities of any Allied propaganda program. Groups of prisoners were routinely trucked to their daily work sites, traveling without the limitations of blindfolds or restricted routes, affording them an unvarnished view of the American heartland. They witnessed the endless mechanized fields of corn and wheat, the factories operating ceaselessly on 3 shifts, the stores overflowing with consumer goods, the parking lots dense with automobiles, and family homes equipped with modern refrigerators and radios. At a cotton gin facility just outside Houston, Texas, Unteroffizier Herbert Lang stood transfixed as a single machine processed more cotton in 1 hour than his entire home village could have managed in a month using traditional methods. This gin was powered by electricity supplied by the Colorado River Authority, a tangible result of a massive rural electrification program that had brought power to 90% of Texas farms by 1943. Lang recorded his astonishment. The farmer who owned this sophisticated operation was nobody special, neither aristocracy nor a party member, just a farmer. Yet, this ordinary man possessed electricity, running water, a truck, a car, and a tractor. Even the farm laborers, including the African-American workers, ate lunches containing more provisions than German industrial workers received in a full week. Lang concluded that this overwhelming abundance was disturbingly the norm. Every farm we passed was the same. Further north, in the sugar beet fields in Nebraska, prisoners encountered levels of agricultural mechanization that defied European comprehension. They learned that a single combine harvester could effectively replace the labor of 100 men. The field stretched impossibly to the horizon, each farm often larger than entire German counties. The farmers spoke casually of yields that would have been considered agricultural fantasy in Germany, citing 60 bushels of wheat per acre compared to Germany's maximum of 30 on its best land. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann, working outside Scottsbluff, captured the chasm between the two worlds. The farmer's son, a boy of 16, drove a tractor worth more than everything my father had earned in his lifetime. When Hoffmann voiced his shock, the boy merely laughed, stating it was not even a particularly good tractor, and that his father was already awaiting a superior new model from John Deere. Perhaps the most devastating insights were reserved for those prisoners assigned to work near or within American factories. While the Geneva Convention prohibited direct participation in war production, a crucial technicality allowed PWs to work in auxiliary industries, thereby freeing American civilians from military manufacturing. This loophole permitted thousands of German prisoners to witness the staggering scale and efficiency of American industrial capacity firsthand. The initial shock of American industrial capacity often occurred in the most mundane settings. At a Campbell soup factory in New Jersey, German prisoners of war stood transfixed, watching production lines that processed more tomatoes in a single day than most German factories handled in an entire month. Operating with a skeleton crew, primarily women and elderly men, as younger workers were deployed overseas, the facility paradoxically exceeded its peacetime production levels. Stabsfeld Webel Ernst Vanner, who had prior experience in a German food processing plant, documented the overwhelming efficiency. He noted that everything was automated: electric conveyor belts, automatic filling machines, and massive steam cookers that processed hundreds of cans simultaneously. The contrast was stark. One elderly woman monitored the controls that managed a volume of output that would have required 50 workers in wartime Germany, performing her task while casually drinking coffee and listening to the radio. Near Detroit, prisoners unloading coal at a power plant gained critical, unsettling glimpses of the automotive industry's conversion to the arsenal of democracy. Across the water, the colossal River Rouge complex, a visible testament to America's manufacturing might, employed 100,000 workers dedicated to producing jeeps, aircraft engines, and tanks. The facility consumed 1.5 million kilowatt-hours of electricity daily, an amount greater than the usage of the entire city of Hamburg. But the shock extended beyond mere production statistics. It was rooted in the visible prosperity of the American working class. We could see the parking lots, wrote Oberreiter Franz Kellner, thousands of cars belonging to workers. Workers in Germany, even our officers, rarely own cars. Here, factory workers drove to work. Kellner recorded the guard's assertion that many workers owned 2 automobiles, one for commuting, one for family use, a claim they initially dismissed as mocking propaganda. By the winter of 1943, The cumulative impact of these observations began producing what American intelligence officers termed ideological collapse syndrome among the prisoners. The Special Project Division, the secret re-education program run by the Provost Marshal General's office, documented increasing numbers of prisoners requesting access to American newspapers, books, and educational materials. Major Paul Noëlhan, a member of the monitoring team, reported the definitive transformation in December 1943. The prisoners no longer argue when shown production statistics. They have seen too much. The most fanatical Nazis have become quiet. They still maintain loyalty to Germany, but no longer speak of victory. Many openly question what they were told about America. The very publications produced by the prisoners themselves began reflecting this profound shift. Deer Roof, the camp newspaper published at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, gradually transitioned its focus from defiant nationalism to serious discussions of democracy, economic systems, and post-war reconstruction. The editors, carefully selected anti-Nazi prisoners, found their audience increasingly receptive to these new ideas. Lieutenant Herman Gutz, captured with the 10th Panzer Division, articulated this realization in a letter that passed American censors. We were told America was a mongrel nation, weak, divided, controlled by Jews, incapable of military prowess. Every day I am here, I see the opposite. This is the most organized, unified, and powerful nation on earth. We were told fairy tales by criminals. The most devastating blow to the core of Nazi ideology did not arrive via Allied bombs or battlefield defeat, but from a calculated act of pragmatic kindness following Italy's surrender in September 1943. German prisoners of war watched, stunned, as their former Axis allies were treated with astonishing leniency. Italian soldiers who agreed to cooperate were formed into Italian service units, granted superior quarters, increased pay, and significant personal freedom. These German POWs witnessed their erstwhile comrades working freely alongside Americans, dining in local restaurants, and even engaging socially with American women. The psychological damage was immediate. Headman Friedrich Schultz recorded the shock. The Italians betrayed us, yet they are treated better than we treated them as allies. They work freely, earn money, send packages home. The Americans show them no hatred. This democracy we were taught to despise appears more honorable than our own system. The profound psychological warfare peaked during Christmas 1943. In an unprecedented demonstration of civic goodwill, American organizations, churches, and civic groups mobilized to send 500,000 Christmas packages to German POWs, men who had been actively trying to kill American soldiers just months prior. Each package was filled with cigarettes, candy, toiletries, and games, while military regulations largely prevented prisoners from accepting widespread invitations to community dinners. The local efforts were overwhelming. At Camp Hearn, Texas, the local Methodist church choir performed Christmas carols in German, while women from the community delivered homemade cookies and cakes. Even the Boy Scouts contributed, delivering handmade Christmas cards. This profound charity toward a declared enemy fundamentally shattered the final remnants of Nazi racial theory. The sheer abundance of the American home front was perhaps the most powerful weapon. Oberleutnant Walter Mueller, whose brother had perished in the bombing of Hamburg, reflected on the experience. They know we are their enemies. Many have sons and husbands fighting against our armies. Yet they show us Christian charity, not propaganda, but genuine kindness. What kind of people treat enemies this way? Only those absolutely certain of victory and secure in their power. The Christmas feast itself defied all comprehension. Turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, pies, and ice cream, quantities of food Germany had not witnessed since before the First World War. Prisoners consumed the meal until they were physically ill, unable to process such resources being lavished upon their foes. Feldwebel Hansa wrote simply, "We ate like kings, better than German generals eat, better than party leaders." The guards confirmed this was not special treatment. It was a normal American Christmas dinner, suggesting inexhaustible national wealth. By early 1944, this material and moral assault transitioned into an intellectual one. Over 40,000 German prisoners were enrolled in robust educational programs, studying English, American history, mathematics, and the sciences. Institutions like the University of Chicago provided correspondence courses, and Stanford University dispatched professors to lecture on democracy and economics. The thirst for knowledge was insatiable. Prisoners, indoctrinated to believe Americans were uncultured barbarians, instead discovered libraries containing millions of volumes, universities that welcomed all social classes, and scientific research that led the world. They read. American newspapers were freely accessible, presenting multiple viewpoints, an intellectual liberty entirely impossible within the confines of Nazi Germany. This open environment extended to the academic sphere. At Camp Shelby, Lieutenant Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a physicist conscripted from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, attended advanced lectures on atomic physics. He later documented a profound experience. American professors, including Jewish refugees from Germany, taught us without hatred. They spoke of science as universal, belonging to all humanity. They were years ahead of German research, yet they shared their knowledge with enemy combatants. This extraordinary generosity of spirit was utterly incomprehensible to minds shaped and constrained by Nazi ideology. The cultural indoctrination continued in the camp theaters, which screened not mandatory propaganda, but regular Hollywood productions. Prisoners watched Gone with the Wind, observing a frank depiction of American defeat and subsequent national recovery that resonated deeply with their own uncertain situation. They were further astonished by The Grapes of Wrath, amazed that Americans would willingly display such self-criticism to their enemies. Lieutenant Joseph Kramer wrote with disbelief, "They hide nothing. They show their problems, their failures, their conflicts. Yet this honesty makes them stronger, not weaker. In Germany, such criticism would mean death. Here it is considered patriotic." Spring 1944 brought expanded prisoner labor programs, coinciding with the absolute peak of American wartime production. German POWs worked in canneries, mills, and colossal fabrication plants, witnessing the full, undeniable might of American industrial capacity. The numbers alone told a story that no propaganda machine could counter. At the Higgins Boat Factory in New Orleans, prisoners unloaded the steel that would become the vital landing craft for D-Day. They watched, stunned, as the workforce assembled 700 boats per month, each one requiring 20,000 separate parts. The factory employed a staggering 20,000 workers, including thousands of women who operated cranes, welded hulls, and managed the complex production lines. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmerman recorded his observations. Women doing men's work, Negroes operating complex machinery, teenagers running drilling equipment. Everything we were told was impossible in a democracy, yet production never stopped. Running 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they produced more boats in a single month than the entire German Navy had built in a year. At Republic Steel in Ohio, prisoners witnessed the relentless production of 10,000 tons of steel daily. The blast furnaces ran continuously, fed by endless trains of iron or arriving from Minnesota and coal from Pennsylvania. The scale defied all German comprehension. The single plant produced more steel than the entire Ruhr industrial region achieved at its peak capacity. Oberwachtmeister Paul Hartmann, who had worked at Krupp before the war, admitted, "I thought I understood industrial production, but this was beyond imagination. They wasted more steel and spillage than we could produce." He noted the irony that American workers complained about overtime while producing quantities the Reich could not achieve, even with slave labor and mandatory double shifts. The summer 1944 harvest provided the final, devastating demolition of Nazi propaganda concerning American weakness. German prisoners worked across the Midwest, witnessing an agricultural production vast enough to feed the world. In Kansas, they watched wheat harvests where single farms produced more grain than entire districts in Germany. Across the vast American landscape, German prisoners witnessed a scale of mechanized production that defied the tenets of Nazi ideology. In the expansive wheat fields of the Midwestern provinces, colossal combines moved with the regularity of ships navigating an ocean of gold, each machine capable of harvesting a staggering 100 acres per day. The monumental grain elevators filled by this efficiency held more wheat than the entirety of Germany imported in an average year. Under Fitzia, Franz Baer, a farmer from East Prussia, recorded the sobering statistics. One American farmer with machinery does the work of 100 German farmers. The scale was so incomprehensible that aerial photographs revealed wheat fields spanning thousands of square miles. The Americans, Baer noted, could lose half their harvest and still have more than all of Europe combined. This industrial capacity was coupled with a staggering paradox of abundance. In California's Central Valley, prisoners assigned to labor in orchards that stretched beyond the visual horizon watched as perfectly edible fruit was systematically discarded for minor blemishes, produce that would have been priceless in hunger-ravaged Germany. To stabilize market prices, entire crops were sometimes deliberately plowed under, a concept of deliberate destruction that caused psychological anguish and breakdown among the starving prisoners. Gerhard Otto Schultz documented the horrific spectacle. They destroyed food to keep prices stable, mountains of oranges bulldozed into pits because they had too many. He recounted their desperate pleas. We begged to be allowed to send them to Germany to our families. Though sympathetic, the guards maintained it was impossible. This strategic waste, in itself, served as undeniable proof of America's limitless material resources. The final, irreversible ideological collapse arrived on June 6, 1944, when news of a Normandy invasion reached the camps. The sheer scale of the operation demonstrated an American organizational capacity that dwarfed the most ambitious dreams of Nazi Germany. The logistical blueprint involved 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and the deployment of 150,000 men in the initial wave alone. Prisoners at Camp Shelby watched newsreels within days of the landing, witnessing the endless streams of vessels, the miraculous deployment of artificial harbors, and a supply system that delivered 15,000 tons daily across open beaches. They watched, transfixed, as their homeland was crushed by the very nation they had been assured was too weak and decadent to fight. Our Friedrich Vonnegut articulated the devastating realization. We knew then that everything was lost, not just the war, but the entire Nazi project. We had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with fairy tales and racial mythology. We sent horses against their trucks, rifles against their automatic weapons, courage against their unlimited resources. Yet, throughout their captivity, German prisoners encountered a force that challenged Nazi doctrine even more profoundly than material wealth, American humanity. Despite the regime's propaganda depicting Americans as weak and sentimental, the prisoners of war discovered a people secure enough in their immense strength to show unexpected mercy. When Gerrit Hans Miller's son perished in the Hamburg bombing, the American camp commander personally delivered the Red Cross message and extended sincere condolences. Furthermore, when Lieutenant Paul Fisher's wife wrote that she was struggling desperately to feed their children, American church groups mobilized and sent crucial food packages directly to her in Germany, aid directed toward enemy civilians in a nation America was actively trying to defeat. While Allied forces continued actively bombing German targets, a critical ideological separation was being enforced within the prisoner camps. As documented by Hedman Otto, the Americans deliberately distinguished the German populace from a Nazi regime, asserting they were fighting Hitler, not the German people. This distinction, initially viewed with deep cynicism as mere propaganda, soon proved profoundly genuine, suggesting a plan for German reconstruction rather than total destruction. This commitment was perhaps most visible in the advanced medical treatment afforded to the prisoners. German doctors worked directly alongside American medical staff, acquiring new techniques and utilizing sophisticated equipment. Prisoners frequently received complex operations that would have been available only to the highest elite within Germany. Crucially, the psychological trauma endemic among Wehrmacht soldiers was addressed with dedicated mental health treatment, a concept virtually unknown under the Third Reich. Dr. Friedrich Bauer noted the staggering shift. They treated attempted suicides with counseling, not punishment. Prisoners with mental breakdowns received therapy, not beatings. This humanity toward enemies revealed a strength we never understood, the confidence of true power. By March 1945, the clandestine re-education program had yielded astonishing, measurable results. Over 25,000 prisoners had voluntarily enrolled in democracy courses. The camp newspapers began publishing detailed articles on constitutional government, the mechanisms of free markets, and the principles of civil rights. Discussion groups vigorously debated the contours of Germany's post-war future. The program's success defied all initial expectations. Prisoners who had arrived as fervent Nazis were now composing elaborate essays advocating for democratic reconstruction. Officers who had previously sworn unbreakable oaths to Hitler were actively formulating plans to implement modern American agricultural methods in a reconstructed post-war Germany. "We became missionary for democracy," admitted Aus-Hermann Göring, a man unrelated to the Reichsmarschall, in a 1975 interview, emphasizing that the change occurred not through coercion or propaganda, but through direct observation. "We saw it work. We saw ordinary people living better than German aristocracy. We wanted that for Germany." The ideological transformation was so complete that American authorities soon grew concerned about the prisoners' excessive zeal for American customs. Some openly requested permission to remain in the United States permanently after the cessation of hostilities. Others cultivated relationships that led to marriage with American women. They met through prison correspondence programs. Ultimately, thousands of these former prisoners would successfully immigrate to America during the 1950s. April 1945 delivered the final, harrowing revelation. As Allied forces liberated the concentration camps across Germany, the inescapable footage was systematically presented to the German POWs. Many initially reacted with furious denial, labeling the images as crude propaganda, yet the accumulating evidence became overwhelming. The testimony of American soldiers, official photographs, newsreels, and eventually corroborating letters filtering in from Germany confirmed the unimaginable horror. The psychological impact was devastating. Men who had tenuously maintained a sense of German military honor, despite their defeat, now faced the total moral collapse of their nation. Everything they had fought for was exposed not merely as a lost cause, but as fundamentally evil. Hedman Walter Schmidt, perhaps, offered the most eloquent and tragic summary. "We thought we were warriors for a great cause. We discovered we were tools of criminals. We believed we were bringing civilization to inferior peoples." The shock of captivity shattered deeply held Nazi convictions. The Americans, whom German propaganda had dismissed as weak and decadent, demonstrated profound, functioning civilization, forcing the prisoners to confront the realization that they themselves were the true barbarians. Prisoners of war found themselves treated with a level of dignity and provided sustenance superior to that experienced while serving the Wehrmacht. This moral paradox, receiving better treatment from their enemies than from their own government, forced a fundamental reevaluation of their worldview. As the war concluded in May 1945, German POWs faced repatriation with a complex blend of dread and anticipation. They had witnessed an America that utterly contradicted the totalitarian narrative. The final months of captivity were not idle waiting. American authorities initiated an intensive program of re-education, providing crucial vocational training, advanced agriculture instruction, and comprehensive political schooling. Remarkably, prisoners learned the tenets of the Marshall Plan, the strategy for reconstruction rather than retribution, even before the official announcement, understanding that the victors intended to rebuild Germany. Ost Friedrich von Tobin captured this pivotal moment. "They prepared us to rebuild our country. They gave us skills, knowledge, hope. They transformed defeated soldiers into future citizens." This stunning generosity from the victors stood in stark contrast to the expected vindictiveness. Between 1945 and 1946, a massive contingent of 371,683 German POWs were repatriated from American camps. They returned not to the triumphant Reich they had left, but to a Germany divided, destroyed, and utterly destitute. Yet, they carried with them an invisible, invaluable asset, the operational knowledge of a functional, democratic industrial society. These German POWs, having directly experienced American prosperity and efficiency, became the unwitting yet powerful agents of transformation essential for post-war reconstruction. They had witnessed industrial prowess, agricultural productivity, and the tangible benefits of democratic governance, proving that reconstruction was not merely possible, but achievable. This generation of former prisoners rapidly ascended to key positions during West Germany's miraculous resurgence. Hans Kroll, incarcerated at Camp Shelby, later served as the West German ambassador to the United States. Walter Hallstein, who taught crucial political classes while held at Camp Co., became the inaugural president of a European Commission. Rudiger von Marr, a prisoner at Camp Hearn, eventually served as Germany's permanent representative to the United Nations, while Edward Ackermann, held at Fort Robinson, emerged as a central leader in German agricultural reform. They integrated American methods into German manufacturing, applied American efficiency to agriculture, and instilled democratic ideals into the nascent political structure. The foundation of the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle of the 1950s, was built substantially upon the knowledge acquired within these American prison camps. As Hans Kroll reflected in his memoirs, we learned that prosperity came from freedom, not conquest. We saw that democracy created wealth, that diversity brought strength, that treating workers well increased production. These lessons, learned while imprisoned, fundamentally shaped the new Germany. Historians widely regard the German POW experience in America as one of the most successful re-education programs in modern history. Without the need for traditional coercive propaganda, the sheer power of American industrial might and democratic success converted formerly hardened individuals into the future citizens vital for a new, democratic Germany. The success of the American strategy relied not upon verbal indoctrination, but upon the inescapable power of observed reality. Prisoners of war witnessed an American society functioning at its zenith, treating enemies with fundamental dignity, while showcasing an industrial capacity that made German production appear primitive. They experienced a standard of living that exposed the promises of the Nazi regime as sheer fantasy. Dr. Arnold Kramer, the leading historian of German POWs in America, concluded that the United States won the propaganda war not through clever messages, but through sheer reality. Every full meal, every electric light, every working toilet was an argument against Nazism. The POWs were converted by prosperity. Statistical data overwhelmingly supports this assessment. Of the 371,683 German prisoners held in the United States, fewer than 1% ever attempted escape, with only 2,222 total attempts recorded. Post-war surveys further confirmed that a remarkable 95% rated their treatment as either good or excellent. This transformation proved enduring. Thousands maintained correspondence with American families for decades after the conflict. The lasting impact culminated in 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the war's end, when surviving German POWs held a poignant reunion in Austin, Texas. Over 500 former prisoners returned to America, many bringing their own families to show them precisely where their profound change in political allegiance and personal outlook had begun. Former Oberreiter Hans Vea, who had been held at Fort Robinson, Nebraska, and later returned to America to become a physician in Georgetown, Maine, spoke at the gathering, noting that life in the camps was a vast improvement for many of us who had grown up in cold water flats in Germany. We discovered running water, central heating, and abundant food. But more than that, we discovered dignity. Former Stabsfellow Kurt Meir, who had labored on farms in Iowa, emphasized the unexpected humanity he encountered. The farmers treated us not as enemies, but as young men far from home. They shared their meals, their knowledge, sometimes their homes. This humanity from people whose sons were fighting against us. This change is forever. At the reunion dinner, former Oberst Hermann Gutz, then 78 years old, delivered the keynote address that captured the essence of the ideological shift. He declared, "We came to America as enemies, as Nazis, as believers in a lie. We left as friends, as Democrats, as men who had seen the truth. America showed us that strength comes not from conquest, but from production, not from hatred, but from diversity, not from tyranny, but from freedom." Gutz concluded that they had witnessed the arsenal of democracy at full production, learning that America's true weapon was its inexhaustible capacity for creation and its unshakable confidence. He affirmed that the Germany which ultimately rose from the ashes was built on lessons learned in American prison camps. We who came as conquerors left as students. The auditorium erupted in a standing ovation, a powerful moment uniting Americans and Germans. Former enemies recognizing profound transformation that had seemed utterly impossible when those first transport trains rolled into Texas in June 1943. The true magnitude of the German prisoner experience in America is quantified by stark statistics, revealing both the sheer scale of the operation and its remarkable, quiet success. The physical infrastructure was vast and rapidly executed, establishing over 500 camps across 45 states, every state except Nevada, North Dakota, and Vermont. This expansive network consisted of 175 main camps and 325 branch facilities, constructed in an average of 90 days per site, designed to house populations ranging from 250 to 12,000 prisoners each. At its peak in May 1945, the system held 371,683 German prisoners of war, part of a total Axis population of 425,871. The influx was continuous. 20,000 new arrivals monthly in 1943, accelerating to 30,000 monthly after D-Day, and soaring to 60,000 monthly during the final months of the conflict. These men were immediately put to work, filling critical labor shortages in 46 states. Their labor contribution was immense, totaling 14 million man-days of agricultural work and processing 100 million board feet of lumber, representing a cumulative labor value of $230 million in the 1940s economy, paid at a daily wage of 80 cents per prisoner. Despite the widespread dispersal of these former enemy soldiers, security was almost flawless. From over 371,000 prisoners, there were only 2,222 recorded escape attempts, a minuscule 0.6%. Crucially, there were 0 successful permanent escapes. Most were recaptured within 24 hours, and no American civilians were ever harmed by escaped POWs. The true investment, however, was psychological and educational. Over 40,000 prisoners were enrolled in formal educational courses, with 30,000 taking English classes, 15,000 in vocational training, and 8,000 utilizing university correspondence courses, while 135 camp newspapers were published. This unprecedented exposure to democratic life bore lasting fruit. Approximately 5,000 former POWs immigrated to the U.S. after the war, and over 12,000 maintained correspondence with American families, a connection that averaged 31 years in duration, often leading to returns as tourists or business partners. The treatment assessment confirmed the success of the program. 95% rated their captivity experience as good or excellent, while 74% believed their captivity had positively changed their worldview. By 1945, less than 10% maintained strong Nazi beliefs, and 61% expressed interest in learning about democracy. The German POWs who experienced American industrial might were not merely observers. They were fundamentally transformed. Their captivity became education, their defeat became enlightenment, and their imprisonment served as liberation from the ideological chains of Nazism. America's most profound victory was ultimately achieved not on the battlefield, but within the confines of these camps, where the overwhelming evidence of democratic prosperity accomplished what armies could not: the complete transformation of enemy minds. They arrived believing in German superiority and American weakness. They departed knowing the truth. The industrial power of the United States was not just overwhelming. It was incomprehensible to minds long shaped by scarcity and tyranny. The vessels that carried these German soldiers back to their shattered homeland in 1946 were not merely troop transports. They were ships bearing the unwitting architects of a new democratic order. These men had witnessed the future of industrial society firsthand, and crucially, they had seen that it functioned with astonishing efficacy. Their personal narrative stands as powerful testimony to a profound strategic truth. The most decisive weapon wielded by the American arsenal was not its formidable military might, but the simple, overwhelming, and undeniable evidence of a free society's capacity to generate unparalleled abundance. The German prisoners of war arrived in America, indoctrinated by the propaganda of the Third Reich, expecting to find a nation weakened and divided. Instead, they discovered an industrial colossus, a powerhouse of unlimited capacity paired with surprising humanity. They were initially stunned by the sheer scale of American industrial productivity, but ultimately, they were fundamentally converted by the very structure of the society that produced it. This deep psychological transformation contained the vital seeds of Europe's post-war redemption and signaled the final, decisive defeat of the Nazi dream. They returned to the ruins of Germany not as broken enemies, but as living, credible witnesses to the staggering achievements attainable under a system of freedom. The spectacular economic miracle that defined West Germany in the 1950s was not accidental. Its foundations were meticulously laid in the American prison camps. Here, former enemy soldiers absorbed a crucial lesson: that genuine prosperity arose not from territorial conquest, nor from the toxic ideology of racial superiority, and certainly not from the iron fist of totalitarian control, but rather from the principles of human dignity, democratic cooperation, and economic freedom. They had arrived as prisoners of war, yet they departed as the first ambassadors to the arsenal of democracy at its zenith. Their astonished awe at American abundance provided the critical psychological bedrock necessary for the formation of the Atlantic Alliance, the successful implementation of the Marshall Plan, and the robust democratic reconstruction of the German nation. This partnership was forged in the moment of revelation, beginning the day 1,850 veterans of the Afrika Korps stepped off a train in the unlikely setting of Mexia, Texas, and realized that the core tenets of their Nazi ideology were entirely false. The saga of the German POWs in America is thus a story of profound redemption achieved through revelation. It demonstrates that the most enduring victories are secured not through widespread destruction, but through compelling demonstration, not through corrosive propaganda, but through demonstrable prosperity, and not through hatred, but through the consistent application of humanity. These former soldiers became the unwitting carriers of transformation, ensuring that their children would grow up in a democratic Germany allied permanently with the United States, a legacy secured not by force, but by the overwhelming power of a successful example. This capacity to transform enemies into friends through the simple power of example was, in the end, America's true secret weapon.